Welcome to 4coder Friday. Let's get into it. I'm going to leave the font size. I've been using smaller fonts because on stream I usually use a slightly bigger font to help with readability. Whoops. Gotta go maximize, not full screen on this monitor. Well, I guess it's the graphics card. But yeah, usually what? Stop that. I said don't go full screen. Hold on a minute. I'm gonna have to fight with 4coder now, apparently. Okay. Maximize. Alright. Staying in this state now. Good. So, where was I going with that? Oh yeah, I've gotten used to using a smaller font because I was just using this font size for a while offline too, but especially with a small monitor it really helps to go back to the smaller font size, and problem with that is on stream it's not such a good idea to go much smaller than this. In fact, this is kind of small in my opinion on the stream, but my monitor is so small that I don't really have a choice. I can't do the thing that like on Bitwise Pear's font looks like this, right? It's like zoomed way in. No, up. This code looks like this big, and it's great for being able to follow along on the stream what exactly is getting, focused on at any given time. But I can't. I have to have a bigger window than that. I might as well just restart 4coder because the resize is so slow with this much code. Hey Abner, I'm getting ready to organize my little testing setup here. Let me go properly maximized again so you can see what's happening. Alright, so let me see what I left on. No, not streaming.h. Where is stream to do? I made a to-do file for streams. There we go. Yeah, so we're now at this one. Organize a testing folder / protocol, etc. for regression testing, and for any other kinds of, manually created tests, I guess. So I guess for that I'm actually talking more about an engineering task outside of the code to some extent. Man, that's a lot of build scripts. Look at this. Yeah. Yeah, those are all needed. I used all of those. That's crazy. Alright, so, right now, whoops, my tests are going right here. And, I have some old stuff that isn't really need to sit around anymore. That can go away. That's like, when I created this folder, it was originally just to download other people's experiments and fix it. Oh, is the article up now, Abner? I guess I didn't see that happen. Let's just take a peek. Hey, testing the JAG compiler. the JAI compiler. Neat. Neat, neat, neat. Cool. I will check out that post. What the heck? I just deleted this. Go away. Alright. Alright, so, now the other thing I have is, this is my input data folder where I just put all these 4AD files that are 4coder input data, but I have another class of tests that I'm mostly using to, it's basically unit test the new features in the 41x engine. And yeah, I said unit test. I'm not apologizing for that. That's basically what it is. And it's been worth it. I'm not discussing it any more than that. And that's basically all in this folder here. So, one thing I want to do is I'm going to consolidate my various methods of testing into one folder. And just thinking this through. Yeah, so I guess what I'll have to do is I'm going to pull up, this is going to change a couple of things that are kind of just pre-baked stuff around the ecosystem of the project. I'm going to first settle on the final destination so I don't have to change everything twice. And then I will go and rewire everything to be able to find the stuff it needs more quickly. So this is going to go in here, and we're going to rename this to like test files. I'm also going to go into here, and lots of files is actually just a test as well. It's just a folder with a ton of files to test, like, you know, file enumeration and opening lots of files simultaneously. Now this is nothing. So I think that with that I've removed my dependence on this data folder completely. So it's gone. Which is good because I developed 4coder on a lot of different machines simultaneously. Like I have the Mac right here that I use for the Mac development, doing the Twitch chat, and then I have a couple more laptops for Windows 10 and Linux stuff. So I end up once in a while on another computer, like trying to pull the Git repository so I can build from source and have 4coder on like my work computer too. So I want to do a better job of keeping the repository fully like self-contained so that it doesn't have references to things outside of it or hard paths. And it's almost actually already set up that way. There's just a couple mistakes. Now, one hard thing about this is since I use Git, I don't really want to be checking in things like these, because these are binaries, and I also have like fonts and stuff. So I set up 4coder non-sorts, which is a separate Git that I update less frequently, and it just contains the binaries and things like this. So like the icon for 4coder is in here. Site resources, as in the images that go onto the site. What's here? I believe this is, yeah, code that isn't mine. This is only separated out from the rest because Actually, this is not only code. This also has libraries in it. But basically, either source or compiled foreign code that I want separated out so that it doesn't affect. First of all, so I don't have the binaries in my repository, but also because I use clock, and I don't want that counting files that I just copied into the project, right? And then dist files is where I put things that get packaged into the distribution, like the fonts. So I'm going to now introduce tests to the non-source repository as well. Now I want to make sure I've named this in a way that I like, so that I am not bothered by my naming scheme for the rest of time. Because once I change this, it's going to be a little bit of work to rewire certain things to go to this directory. And I don't want to have to do that work more than once, so let's get the names right. So input data is correct. Test files. Yep, that's gone. I think for the rest of this, we can keep it. That's gone. That's gone. Hold on, there's a few data dumps in here. I want this to just be a clean file for tests because I think it just became the dumping grounds for like nonsense. And so any binary files besides this one, which is meant to be here for testing, any other binary files I'm gonna get rid of. I'll just keep all of the text files because it like doesn't hurt, right? Okay, so that is good. Now, and you know what, this doesn't really need to be here either. And what are those files exactly? Those are like sample files that I use for, you know, various tests. And then let's see. Yeah, this one I'll just keep it named lots of files. And I'm going to rename this to test data, I think. Alright, I'm happy with that. So now add in all that new stuff. It's a lot of stuff. Actually, I'm curious how much stuff that is. 21 megabytes. Alright, give me a minute. I want to check what my limits are on my repository. Do. Hello, Doubter. Welcome to the stream. Alright, so the question is really have I used too much space, or how much space do I have? Let's see, where is this? this breakdown of this anywhere. I think we're okay, but it is pretty big. We'll see. But it says here I have a gigabyte, so I think we're good. Yeah, Captain Kraft, I don't have the big monitor set up again yet. Situations, you know? So let's go ahead and commit that then. Sample files. Yep. I can't scroll. I can't remember why that is. Oh well. Git commit testing data. Now the only, I've just remembered one little issue here. The only little snafu is that the input data is going to get updated frequently. And there's actually, ooh, that's nasty. So input data is going to be updated frequently, and that means that I would have to constantly commit and fight merge message problems and stuff like this. So, and I have a generator for it. That's all being generated from stuff in the main repository. So I actually don't want to try to sync that test data. I don't want to sync the test data from the non-source repository at all. But for the sample files and the lots of files tests, I want those to be synced on the non-source repository. So I guess what I'll do is we'll keep the structure like this so that all the tests can go together, but we're going to put in a gitignore. Now the question is, how does gitignore work? Because no one ever knows. And by no one I mean me. I don't know. I don't understand. So I think what I want to do is tell it to ignore test data / input data *4id, right? I want it to ignore those, and then what I'm going to do is over here I'm going to put in the mkdir.txt. Put this here so Git will actually make the directory. Alright, so let's try that. So that removed those files, and hopefully when I recompile those files, it won't start syncing them. And hopefully this means that the test data can all stay together, but I won't actually try to sync anything in that one folder. Because there's no need to sync that. It's all compiled from stuff that's synced in the main repository. Okay, now we actually want to check to see that we're literally actually getting what we want from that. So go away. One panel because my fonts are too big. There we go. Build tests. But now, before I do that, it actually is not going to work. So that's just going to put it right here again. So what we want to do first is go to build tests and tell it to redirect the test. Yeah, so please go to 4coder non-source / test data / input data to build those tests. Alright, let me check up on the chat. Let's see, so no. Okay, so the first comment, I believe, or question is, Jeremiah is asking, after working on 4coder for this long and maintaining cross-platform builds, which OS do you prefer to develop in? I still prefer to develop from Windows. I'm not sure I would say that I prefer to develop for Windows. I don't really prefer the API or the they're all kind of a toss-up. They have it's like the Windows one is close to what you would want, except that it then goes ahead and screws you up by being totally different in important ways, like files systems being non-case sensitive all of a sudden, and slash is going the wrong way, and the compilers being different and hard to deal with. So Windows, the base API that you're writing to is the one that I would like to use everywhere for most things. But I don't like a lot of the cruft it creates when by just doing weird things, or it's sort of out, like around the edges, right? Linux gets like the details right, but gets big things wrong, which is annoying. But once the big things it does get wrong, you can usually just get around that. The big things it gets wrong, it gets them wrong by forcing you to write way more code to do the same thing that you could have done in an API call on Windows. But it gets a lot of little details right, which is nice too, because those little details, although it's more work to write the Linux code in the first place, it's actually like less likely to have weird file bugs, it seems, than anything else. Mac is kind of close to perfect, except that they use a different language. If they just had the Cocoa API in C, I think I would say Mac is the preferred target. But I don't have a preferred target. They all have some nonsense that makes life difficult. As far as where do I like to write the code, I like to write it on Windows. Well, that's just because Visual Studio is there, right? Once I can integrate a debugger into 4coder, I'll probably prefer Linux. Bruce Bob asks, how are you doing rendering of text? Are you using curses / end curses? No. There will be a version that does use that so that it can be on the command line, like a terminal version, someday, but that's not really on the short-term horizon here. But no, right now I just use sort of like it's core profile OpenGL, but it's OpenGL 2.0, right? I'm not using super modern OpenGL. I plan to support several renderers because like the OpenGL renderer seems to be kind of buggy. in the sense that like it just drops random, like it just drops shit. Like I see this once in I saw this really badly on Handmade Hero stream when I watched a couple times, and now I see it once in a while in the corner of my eye if I'm paying attention, like when I'm streaming and stuff. That if I'm moving my cursor around in just the right way, it will like disappear certain characters out of the screen. And I can't pin that down as a bug on my side now. It totally could be a bug on my side, but I don't know. I can't really figure out how that would be possible on my side. It shouldn't be just disappearing stuff out of the middle. And it's so random, and it only happens for one frame. It really feels like something where like the graphics card just for whatever reason doesn't end up getting the data, or like it's like, oh, that's too much stuff coming in, I'm ignoring these. I don't know. I don't exactly know what's going on there. And so just to rule that out, as like if it is a bug on my side, one way to rule that out would be to support multiple renderers and observe the same problem everywhere. Then I would know it's on my side. Alright, and last question. C-Jim asks, did you start 4coder at the start of Handmade Hero? Close to it. Handmade Hero started in like November of 2014. And I started 4coder in like December of 2014. So yeah, it was. I'm trying to remember the timeline with precision here because I also was kind of inspired by J-A-I, you know, the language thing. But that was a few months earlier. Because that was a pretty big inspiration too. I feel like there was a particular stream that happened in December that actually encouraged me to do 4coder that came from John. And it was Handmade Hero that sort of gave me the basic tools to know how to proceed reasonably, but with those two things, together, it was basically the start of 4coder somewhere in there. Yeah. All right, all right. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, we wanted to see if we are building to the correct location yet. Okay, so they didn't go there. Alright, so I have all of my scripts here, it looks like, except... Oh shoot, I dropped a recorded script when I deleted everything. Okay, not a problem. Let me just check real quick whether that script was being used for anything. I just gotta look at invoke. Okay, so I was not invoking that recorded one, so that's okay that we lost that. And now the question is, if I go to non-source and I say add, alright, then it doesn't add that 4ID stuff. I guess I'm already committed, right? So we're good. I guess I want to push too. Alright, let's go back to the code, and now the next question is, are there any other things? That was one of the things, but there are definitely other things that I need to relink. So another one is the solution for my debugger. There we go. So I should be able to run this and get the same kind of behavior I used to get. Great. Cool, cool, cool. So I see some chat about text rendering, and I want to float some questions out there because maybe there are people who know OpenGL better than me. But I've been working on, like, thinking through, and well, really I've been doing text rendering at work, so I've been studying the problem, and once I am done with it there, I might go back and do the upgrade to the 4coder one too, to do a slightly, apply some of the things I've learned at work. So, right now, the trade-off that is most annoying is that if you have text of multiple colors, which something like a text editor will have, you can't render that. You have a trade-off. You can render that all in one draw call with multiple different colors if, for each vertex of each glyph, you specify a color. But that means you're sending somewhere between 3 and maybe 3 or 4 new coordinates for each vertex, which is a significantly bigger sort of amount of data to transfer when you were only sending maybe 4 or 5 coordinates already per vertex. You're getting close to doubling the size of each vertex. And often what you have there is even worse because you have a string of like 10 characters or 20 characters that are all the same color. So you feel like deep down in your soul there should only be one time that you specify that color. Like I shouldn't be specifying it, well, let's see, 10 characters with 6 vertices per character is 60. So I'm not specifying a color 60 times for something that is all the same color. The other way to do that is to say, no, we'll just break it up into multiple draw calls, and each color gets its own draw call, and it goes down as a uniform. And that is what I'm doing now because it just seems better, but I can't tell for sure what's more important, getting it down the number of draw calls or getting down the total amount of data transfer, because people don't. I can't really find an analysis of the point of the trade-off there, right? And the formula, I guess I should say, the weights of the different things, the consequences of high draw calls versus high data transfer. The other thing you could do is you have a color palette that you specify as a uniform array of colors, and then you just put each glyph gets one new coordinate, which is its index into the color palette. And now that I say it out loud, I'm not sure why I haven't done that besides the complexity. Yeah, so there's a couple options you could do if you palletize the colors. You could put them in a texture too, which is a neat idea because then to specify a color, you got a one-dimensional texture, you just specify the coordinate in the texture, and to change your color palette, you just binding a new texture, and to create your initial color palette, you're probably just filling a small buffer of something like no more than 256 different pixels and submitting that. It would add complexity. Okay, here's why it would add complexity to do a color palette. I can just, for one thing, it's kind of like playing Go, right? There's a certain level to which the reason I say it would add complexity is like down in here. It's like right brain stuff. I just feel it in my soul that going down that route is going to be complex, and I can't necessarily tell you all the reasons. I feel that it would be, like, having seen the way certain things like this, similar things like this go, it feels like it adds another step of complexity that I'm not sure how bad it is, and so I've steered away from it. But here's why it's hard to, or here's why it's not preferable. The fully flexible, or whoops, the fully state-free API looks like this, right? You go like draw this at the coordinates 10, 10. Give it the color of, let's do it this way, right? So my coordinates will be in a v2. My color will be, you know, like this. Maybe. And then the text would be, you know, this, right? This is the fully, and maybe you even want in there, like, font, my font, or my face even, right? So this is the API which, if you can render text like this, you have no state, so you're not doing things like draw color here, where you set your draw color separately, and now your future calls are all dependent on this color being set. Now, this might be the better API to actually use, because if you're going to be doing a lot of stuff in one color, then right, so now you can do two things of the same color without this, but you also have the thing where, like, you have hidden state that is coupled to the meaning of a call, and so the fully, like, functional programming style thing is this one, right? And so if there was no other trade-offs to consider except what's the perfect API, this would be it. Now you might say, no, we can't do this because of the data transfer rate, like we need to set colors occasionally instead of all the time and only switch when needed. Or maybe we have a thing internally that's checking this and only emitting a change color if the color changed, but then we're doing extra work to do the check when maybe the code on the outside knew what was the correct thing to do already and could have prevented the checks, right? So there's trade-offs there to consider, but I'm saying imagine that none of those trade-offs exist. This is the API you want. Now let's suppose we already have this working, but we don't have color palettes set up, right? The question is, in a vacuum with no other color trade-offs, or no other trade-offs having been made yet, and we have the perfect API, and we haven't considered any other trade-offs, and then we go, what do we want to do about the number of draw calls? Should we switch to a color palette? Now what you're doing is every time you get one of these colors, you're checking what's the current color palette, does it have this color on it? If so, what is the coordinate for that color? If not, do I make a new color palette or do I modify it? That is if you keep the API the same, right? If you don't, and that's super complicated right there, right? You're now talking about how do I index my palette into the doubter. By the way, how would you detect if it changed if it is stateless? So when I say stateless, I mean that the API is stateless, not that the implementation is stateless. The implementation could remember this state, that this was the last thing we did. I'm just saying that there's a difference between these APIs in that this API promises to do the right thing, Whether or not it's keeping an internal state to optimize it, I don't care. It's promising to do the right thing when I pass in a new color, right? So it can still keep a state, um, but it can still keep a state. I'm just saying it's stateless as an API. I don't have to manage a state. This is kind of like retain mode versus media mode, I guess, is another way to look at it. I'm not, the other side is not retaining a color for me, kind of a thing, that I'm depending on it. Like, I'm always specifying the color. It's not quite retain mode. Don't fully internalize that idea, but it's the same sort of concept. I'm analyzing what's the best API right now. So this is the best API, but it doesn't necessarily allow for the best implementations. But if we want to ask what's the trade-off for picking this optimization versus that one useful way to do that is to pick a benchmark against what's the ideal API and what's the API I have to settle with if I do this optimization. If I do color palettes and I insist on keeping this API, the complexity is super high because now whenever you specify a color, you're asking, does this color already exist on a color palette? If so, which one and where? If not, let's make a new one. And all of that is fully complicated. Now, the alternative is that we could reduce the amount of state, like we could keep it mostly stateless and just add the retained portion to the API, the stateful portion of the API, in a very light-handed way, which is where we do draw set color palette, context palette, and then this becomes, you know, color palette, let's just do it like this, make palette, right, and then, you know, we do this. Alright, so now we basically have settled on we have to do a set color thing, but we're not just doing a set color, we're setting the whole color palette. This has all the kind of nastiness that a set color thing would have, but it is the cleanest way to do a color palette, probably, because you're just barely getting retained stuff here. The only thing you're retaining is a state. You don't actually get a handle back with a lifetime that you have to manage. You could make it a little less stateful by going more retained-ish, by going like this. Don't set the palette. Get your palette back. Maybe get it back as an ID. And then we do palette right here. So now I'm specifying which palette and the ID, but now the problem is I'm maintaining the lifetime of these palettes. Later I'm going to have to do something like this probably. Right? I'm probably spelling palette wrong too. Let me double check that. Yeah, I'm totally spelling it wrong. Don't ever learn spelling from me. There we go. Alright, but my point is, you guys are thinking about switching to a color palette in the terms of, now the switch to a color palette fully infects the way you can draw text. You can no longer just say, I want to put text of this color on the screen, and you are completely switching modes to a different kind of system, which is fine if you say that that's the system you want, and you're willing to fully, completely change what your API is in exchange for having the speed up in the rendering. I understand that, but what I'm trying to do is explain why there's what the complication is, and the complication isn't that it's hard, it's that it changes changes you from the fully general API to an API where you do more management, right? That's what a complexity is. You're now thinking about more stuff to do the same thing, right? Now to render something, I'm thinking about this, and if I set up a convention where 0 is always the default text color or something, now I've just gone a further step towards I'm locking in specific meanings that I have to follow, and it's farther from the general API and closer to just a specialized API for that particular kind of text rendering, if that makes sense, right? I mean, maybe it's the right trade-off to make that call, but I'm just saying I've avoided it because it does add more things to think about. It makes your code more specialized, which is what kind of it's sort of like there's a trade-off between writing the fully general thing and writing the simple thing, right, that directly solves your problem. But then there's also a trade-off between writing the simple thing that directly solves your problem and the optimized thing for your problem. And there's a point at which you are not generalizing more than you need to, and you're not specializing more than you need to. And this is specializing more. Well, this might not be special more than I need to, but it's specializing more than that point where you're right at the fully simple thing. But I'm going to sit here and think about this for a minute because it is an important topic that I have to deal with in 4coder at some point. Now, if we don't go this route, right, so this route is where we create pallets and we still keep the API such that I'm passing things in to tell it what I want to call. This has the advantage that now when something's rendering the wrong color, I can look and be like, okay, well, I see that this is where the palette is coming from. Whereas in the other ones, the colors kind of get magicked in. If, on the other hand, we're doing just the sort of draw set palette approach, then this palette gets magicked in, but I don't have to manage a lifetime for a palette object. Now, another thing I could do is I could just say I'm never going to manage the lifetime for a palette object, but I'm still going to pass it in. This is what we do with colors. And the way that would work is it would have to diff the palette with the previously set palette all the time. That might not be doable. Yeah, that's not really doable either. Yeah, it might be right that that's the right trade-off to make. I like to sit on the point of the most simple implementation until an overriding concern forces me towards a more general thing if I need to handle more cases, or a more specialized thing if I need more speed, right? One bad thing about a color palette is that if I start doing the way where I'm fixing by convention that 0 is a background and 1 is a default color and 2 means this and 3 means that, then anyone who comes along and wants to customize and say, well, I want a color for this thing, they look at my set things and there's not a thing for that, they're now forced to hack it and say, well, I'm not really using this color here for anything, the what should I call it, like the color for unselected margins. I'll reuse that color because I don't really care what it is, and then I can get it to render that color in this case somehow. Right? You're definitely, when you make these kind of decisions, you're also passing those limitations on to the customizer in 4coder. So I don't think I would go so far as to say specify a fixed index goes to a fixed meaning. What I might say is that you have a color palette, up to 256 colors or something like this, and then that means you have one coordinate per glyph. Well, you still have one coordinate per vertex. Because obviously the really nice thing to be able to do would be able to say, here's one coordinate that applies to batches of 6 vertices at a time. So Godling72 asks, just do color per vertex. So here's the question though, right? You're saying that if I do anything other than color per vertex, that's premature optimization. Is color per vertex premature optimization? Because the other thing I could do is do a color in a uniform, which is what I'm currently doing, and one draw call per like series of characters of the same color, right? And I don't know what the trade-off value is between fewer draw calls and smaller amounts of memory. Like, should I prefer to get it down to one draw call and stuff way more memory per vertex into the vertices, or should I take the the 40 or 50 draw calls that it takes to render everything maybe, and do it per uniform? If I knew that one of those was not even a problem, I wouldn't consider this at all. There's sort of like, if it's super valuable to get down to one draw call, then I start to ask, okay, easiest thing to do is put one color per vertex and just have lots and lots of duplicated memory stuffed in there, but that's not a problem. Second thing I ask is, why isn't there a way when I'm programming the GPU to say, hey, apply this one vertex to the next 6 smaller vertices? Like, don't advance your counter or whatever. I know that's not how a GPU works at all in parallel, but why can't I tell it, when you're using this, when you're addressing this index or this vertex, the way you pull its color data is you don't it's not spread out as much. Why? It seems like that's something that I should be able to specify, but maybe there's a good reason where it's like, no, we don't like to pull from 2 different arrays. I don't know. And it's not instancing, at least I don't think it's instancing, because the difference between this and instancing is that with instancing you have to do it like this. You specify, I'm not sure how to best draw a picture. You specify like your vertices. So let's say this is my array of vertices, right? And then if I said like, alright, I want, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, there's one glyph, 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 there's one glyph. And say I want to render all these glyphs. And then each of those, is a different point. Some of them are the same point to make triangles, but then it's like, all right, here's a color for this glyph, 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 here's a color for this. I would like to be able to tell it, whenever you're in one of these 6 vertices, pull from here. Whenever you're in one of these 6, pull from here. But what instancing actually does is not that. Instancing would say, I want to render that mesh with, these intersections, right? So it's like, render with this thing, this thing, this thing, this thing, this thing, and this thing, then advance this one and do all of those again, right? That's my understanding of what instancing does, is it does like that. Now maybe I'm wrong, maybe there's a way to get instancing to do what I want. We could go and look at the instancing API, but I'm pretty sure that the instancing API works like this. If I specify 6 different colors, it would apply the mesh it would take this as the instance, right? And it would say apply that instance to this one, and then to this one, and then to this one. I couldn't tell it take this as an instance, and then this as an instance, and then this as an instance. At least I don't think you can, but maybe you can. I might misunderstand that. Yeah, I agree that I could use something like a uniform buffer object, but that's just going back to the palette thing, right? So Godling72, are you saying that it's more work to do more than one draw call than it is to do separate draw calls with different uniforms, and less data transfer? Don't like the idea of a push pop on pallets, either. Um, um, let's see. How would that work? I don't think I like that. Yeah, that still has the problem that you're magicking the color in. Yeah, I understand the idea, Godling, of how you do one big array and you push everything onto it and you submit that whole array. The question is, suppose I'm trading off between submitting 2 megabytes with one draw call or 1 megabyte with 40 draw calls. I don't know which of these is a better situation. That 1 megabyte being like, imagine I didn't have to double the size of a vertex by putting a color on it everywhere. And so it's just an XY and a UV and not then also a color, right? That doubles the size of a vertex. And so we're roughly doubling the size of the memory. We would also have to do a little bit more transfer for all the uniform sets, but every time I set a uniform, that's only it's a little bit more than a megabyte, right? So it's like plus epsilon, right? Plus a little bit more, much less than a megabyte. That I didn't have to transfer here, since I wasn't setting that uniform. Um, well, the point is, I've already implemented this. It's not really a premature optimization to consider what the best optimization is when you are considering how you want to optimize something. If I take as the problem, what's the optimal way to do this that I can implement easily, I'm not saying I need to implement this from scratch, like let's get it done today. I'm saying I want to consider the performance characteristics today. So premature optimization uh, isn't really a useful thing to do. The other thing is I do realize that this isn't a huge bottleneck at the moment, and the real source for my concern is that if I start mixing font faces, like right now, the 4coder system could use a lot of improvement anyway for other reasons. But yeah, I'm discussing this more as in terms of what is a useful way to do this when I do know it's a problem, not I'm actually making plans to do anything about it right now in my code. Doubter, there is a way to do that. That's a geometry shader. So Doubter's asking, is there a way to pass a single position, size, and texture and have the shader construct the whole quad, yeah, you can do that. So you would specify like maybe bottom left corner and then a height and width, and then you would also specify a UV, like one UV coordinate, and then the height and width of the UV box. And so that would be 2, 4, 6, 8 coordinates per glyph, and then you would have a geometry shader that creates the other like the 6 vertices out of the one. But that's adding a geometry shader to the pipeline, which I don't really want to do. If I take that off, if that's on the table, you can, with geometry shaders on the table, you can do like lots of crazy stuff. But that's a road you only want to go down if you're really willing to go full crazy. The other thing to keep in mind is a memory optimization is a speed optimization when you're talking about transfer rates, right? If your concern is I want to be able to get this many things done per frame, and the amount of memory it's taking is too much for me to transfer, then it's a real problem. Right? So reducing the amount of memory is not really, that could be a speed optimization too in this kind of case. It's hard to say. What I mostly want to know is why I can't do this. This is the main reason why I'm belaboring this point and not getting back to real progress. Is I want to be able to do something kind of like instancing, where I submit a vertex array in such a way that I tell it not to advance the pointer on this array for every single vertex, right? So it's got like, when you're pulling from this vertex, go to this vertex for your color. Like, that's something you can just do a divide and find out where it is. So, and it can already, you don't have to interleave your data. So either the driver is automatically interleaving things for you anyway, in which case just give me the API and lie to me so that I can at least structure my code this way for the cases where the driver doesn't have to do it, or if there's just no such thing as a GPU that can do this. My question is, why? Does the driver always re-interleave? Why does the API allow you to submit different arrays if it can pull from multiple sources? I don't understand why it can't do that. It seems like there should be an API for that, is what I'm saying. I have looked at the time it takes to submit this kind of data to a GPU, at least for as far as I can trust the graphics debugger that I was looking at to profile this. It's, I mean, it's, again, my point is it's not a huge concern right now with the with the performance. It's not really a huge bottleneck. My point is more, I want to be a person who knows how to handle this when it does become the concern, right? But how much time does it take? I mean, in terms of latency or throughput, I can't remember the numbers off my head, but the one you care about there is the throughput mostly. And it's such that you can basically submit that, but you're submitting, worst case, you're submitting like 20 megabytes every frame, which isn't that bad. Even with if a fully blown out, with this. Even if you do the thing where your colors get interleaved like this, so that you have much wider data. It's about 20 megabytes. I'll just do the calculation for you guys on stream. Alright, so here are the questions. First of all, let me make sure I'm in. Okay. So, how many? We're going to multiply various things together. So 4 bytes per coordinate, basically. 6 vertices per glyph, and let's say we're doing the full thing where we do 2 xy, 2 uv, and 4 for color. That's 8 coordinates. Or 8 coordinates per vertex, okay? Now, that's how many coordinates it takes to do one glyph. Or that's how many bytes it takes to do one glyph. Now the question is, how many glyphs can we fit on the screen? And if you have a wider screen than mine doesn't quite work for this, but if you have a wider screen than mine, I'm trying to remember because I worked this out at one point. Let's just take screen dimensions, right? Let's do 1920 divided by the width of a character. Width of a character at a normal size is something like, let's be somewhat generous to make this number look smaller and divide by 8. So 240 across. Is that right? 240? Yeah, I think 240 across. And 1080 divided by about 12, or let's be generous, I said, so 14. So 77 down. Whoops. Times 77. What? Okay, this is all messed up. Okay, 192 bytes per glyph. About 77 down. And what? Alright, my calculator's messed up. 1 second. 1920 divided by 8. 240. Okay, let's do it this way. 77 times 240. That's how many glyphs we can expect to fit on the screen at a somewhat large font size, like 12-point font, or actually 14-point font. And then times, we said 4 bytes per coordinate, 8 coordinates per vertex, 6 vertices per glyph. So that's how many bytes we're talking about. So yeah, that's like 3.5 megs. And then if you want to know how many times we're doing that in a second, we multiply that by 60, and there we go. That's the number I was looking for. So it's something like 200 megabytes per second that you have to be able to transfer, which is kind of doable, but you know, just you're also gonna maybe send down textures once in a while and stuff. I don't know. It's just seems like a lot. Anyway, alright, I lost my thinking what we were doing. We're organizing tests. Yeah, but Raspberry Pi wouldn't be on such a large monitor. Alright, I'm not going to keep, discussing this all day, but there's one other reason to be concerned about filling 200 megabytes per second, and that's also that you are making the work of filling the buffer harder, right? The CPU still has to fill that buffer, and copying that color in over and over again is just more work you have to do to fill the buffer on the CPU side. Even if you can submit that to the GPU every frame and not be concerned about it, it's just all around clearly not the most compact way to do the thing. And the whole point of the discussion is there a easy way to optimize that without sacrificing anything? And it looks to me like, as far as anyone on the chat knows, the answer is no. But you don't find those kinds of things out without asking. So, we were working on the tests. I can run the test build and it goes to the right directory. I've got that wired up correctly, so the next question is, what else do I need to wire up? And the other things I need to wire up are the tests that are built, the unit tests that are in the 41x branch. So I guess for the first time on stream, I will switch to my 41x branch and give you guys a little bit of a taste of what that looks like. And since this turned into the discuss fonts stream, I'll probably wrap this one up once I'm sure that I've done this migration stuff correctly. And I will take a lunch break and come back to do the other stuff. Doubter, I still don't think that that's true, because I think adding a geometry shader to your pipeline is a compromise. I think that that would be actually something I would avoid enough. I wouldn't go that route first. The compromise of I think the compromise of a color palette would be more enticing to me than a geometry shader. Maybe that's a bad way to look at life. Although, you know what you could do? Here's the solution. You do a color palette. Oh, this is so simple. This is why I chat about this until the idea comes to me, right? I understand the problem is I'm submitting. Let's break this down even more. There we go. That's one vertex without the colors. Godling, that's what I'm asking, is how do you do one color per character in the vertex shader? How do you do that? How do I assign one color? Are you talking about on the uniform, binding it to a uniform for each character? Are you talking about something else that I'm not understanding? I don't know. I mean, one nice thing, well, that's what I want, is one color per character. That would make me very happy, because it's 6 coordinates per vertex, which is, you know, with 6 coordinates per vertex, or with 6 coordinates per character. No, 6 vertices per glyph. That's what I'm getting at. 6 vertices per glyph means that if you add a color to each vertex, that's 4 times 6 bytes per glyph. Yeah, that's what I'm asking. How do I do that? Remember when I drew this? I drew this picture, right? So here are my glyphs. There's one character. There's one character. There's one character. Each one has 6 vertices. And then I get a second array that's this one, this one, this one, and this one. and it's narrower, and I tell it to index this one. Somehow I have to tell it, when you index this, take the index of your vertex divided by 6. That's what I want to know how to do. If the GPU can do that, then that changes my life, because I've always felt like I needed to do this kind of thing all the time and didn't have a good way to do it. Because I have several things in one of my systems, I have several things like this color. Another one is that there are actually two frame buffer, or there are two textures bound, like two different textures that you could be sampling from, and that gets put in as a vertex as well. If you can do that, that's what I want. If you can't do that, then here's what we do. We keep this API exactly the way I like it. We have face ID right here. Let's say color red, just to speed things up a little bit. Just to be clear, all of this is too new since I'm still on OpenGL 2 in the 4coder renderer. Bind buffer, vertex attrib, vertex attrib. Okay, Godling, yes, I know how to bind multiple buffers and multiple vertex attributes. The question is, how do I tell it to use a different stride? Or how do I tell it to use a different advance rate? I know you can bind multiple arrays. That's not the problem. The problem is, how do I tell it that this one doesn't advance at the same rate as this one? Because otherwise it will assume that it needs to do this, and it'll give a different color to each of these vertices. Now let's see. Vertex attrib divisor does look like it solves the problem, and you just need 3.3. So my next renderer will probably be able to do this. That's super good to know. Although this looks like it's only for instancing. Yeah, this is for instancing, isn't it? Yeah, that doesn't quite work. Divisor doesn't do what you think it does. Sorry. What that'll do is it'll break it out. So it'll say, if you put in a divisor of 1, it says, alright, after you've done all of the zeros once, advance to the next vertex and do them all again with the second vertex. It does not let you do... Yeah, that's the whole point, Godling, is how do I have two arrays where I don't index them with the same index? Yeah, but you don't get when you're writing shader code, you don't get to determine what vertex array you're pulling from. Like, you don't get to do that indexing yourself. OpenGL does the vertex before you. It indexes the vertex arrays before you. You would have to be able to pass that in as well, this is the point. This is the point that I'm getting to. I think you're on to the same idea as I am now. So the way I would do this is we keep this here, and but you wouldn't be able to do that with a vertex array, right? You can't index your vertex array manually, can you? Color red at that position. Hello world. Okay, so you want to render like this. You set your face, your color, and your position directly with each call. And then what will happen is internally it's going to keep a an array that it's building of all the colors. So this would build something that looks like the stars, right? It would build that on the fly. So every time I set a color, it's got some array where it pushes on the next This might be what I need, Jesse Meyer. It's a bit long, so I'm going to read this at a different point maybe. But it doesn't matter. We don't need to do that. Alright, I'm going to ignore the chat because I have the solution and there's no point in talking about it anymore. So, what you do is you're building up these colors on a parallel array from the vertices. It's not it's not interleaved, it's packed separately like this. Right? So color, 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 and then when you are done building up your set of draw commands, right? Because I basically push this all onto a big draw command buffer. Once it's done, like here's a primitive that we're going to use. It's all the same font, so we won't have to change texture atlases, and we have all these vertices we want to put down. Each of those vertices will be equipped with one 4-byte index that tells it where in this array it goes. So it actually becomes like this, right? We have two parallel arrays. The 6 coordinates, whoops, I don't need to do this. The 6 coordinates for each glyph, and those 6 coordinates have not 4 new coordinates. These vertices don't have 4 new coordinates, they have 1 new coordinate, right? So that's going, instead of from 4 to 8, 4 to 5 coordinates per vertex. And then these get submitted as a texture, and we pull from that in the fragment shader. What do you guys think about that? So every time I would have to submit a new texture, a one-dimensional color texture, and then, in fact, I could even avoid putting in the extra coordinate here by using vertex ID, right? I know that the first 6 vertices all go to 0, so I wouldn't even make this any bigger. I would say, give me the vertex ID, and I will divide that by 6 and find out what color I need in the texture. What do you guys think about that? No color palettes, one draw call, and all you have to do is, in addition to submitting your vertex data, you have to submit a texture. Yeah, it's a dynamic palette. That's the idea. That's how I'm going to do it when I get around to it, I think. Alright, anyway, thanks for helping me hash that out. That was interesting. And I still wish that I could figure out a way to do that the even fancier way. Actually, no, I prefer that because if you have less throughput, yeah. A texture upload is the same. I mean, it's not worse than a vertex array upload, as my understanding. In fact, if you're worried about it, you could just render to it too. I feel like the transfer would be about the same. The only thing that could be worse is maybe if there's more management in the driver or in the GPU itself to like organize the memory on the other side. But you could avoid all that by just rendering to it too, right? Just make it a frame buffer and render to it. Then if that's the other alternative, and then what you're transferring is still a vertex array anyway, right? A vertex array with a color at each position. And yeah, you have to do extra work to make it the transfer faster, but I doubt that that would be faster. But if it really does matter which kind you're transferring, then that's an option too. Okay, so let's switch to test build script updated to new directory. I know that idea I just presented is very similar to the idea that Later Doubter is very similar to the idea that Wan Chun brought about what was it about tile tile rendering. Godling, that might be exactly what you were trying to say. I don't know. The difference is that I just conceptualized it as something you do in the fragment shader, not as something you do in the vertex shader. But you told me to submit it as a vertex array, which wouldn't work for what I said. But it's the same basic idea at a conceptual level, yes. You just build up your array of colors and submit that every frame, and then index into it. Okay. Alright, we are now on the 41x branch, people. This is my super awesome experimental stuff. Alright. So, since you're all, I know people on the internet, I'm just going to show you the differences. You might notice that this 5 and 6 here is different from what was in the other branch. Here's my unit tests and my profiler for the unit test, basically. Ah, black screen. Good cut. Good call. Good call. Darn integrated graphics. Okay. I have no idea if Vulkan addresses that. The impression I get is that with Vulkan you end up doing stuff that is basically at a lower level than you're interested in, and then you don't actually get access to anything you couldn't already do anyway. Like that's the reviews I've heard, which is that yeah, it's lower level, but it's lower level in the way that like if you if someone proposed to you that the problem with C was that sometimes it does high level stuff, and they give you a lower level language, and the lower levelness of it was that it made you automatically manage the registers to do function calls, but it didn't stop doing other high level stuff, like implicit float to ints or implicit downcasts of integers and stuff. Yeah, you can't render as quads if you are using modern OpenGL though. It's kind of a bummer. If there's a way to do quads when you're not in fixed function pipeline, that would also help, obviously, by a factor of about 30% speed up or memory reduction. Or if I could do triangle strips and do it all in one draw call without having to submit a bunch of extra vertices to tell it where to split. Yeah, you could write a shader for that, but isn't that a geometry shader, Captain Craft? Or is there a way to make a shader that does the 4 points as 2 triangles? I don't know how I would structure that. Slug. I don't know what slug is. Can you link me? If it's like a library or something, the reason I don't want that is because I'm also... Uh, it's not just about 4coder, right? This is also what I'm working on at work, and so that's why it's on the mind, is finding a nice way to handle it would be good. I'm not talking about fonts anymore, people. We're moving on. Yeah, but you can't... that's not how a vertex shader works. You can't... You... when you submit a primitive, it doesn't... You don't get to just say from the vertex shader, I now magically have more triangles than what the primitive was originally. In a vertex shader, all you're doing is moving points around. The set of which point... Like, the set of the number of points being used gets carried over to the fragment shader. You can't like emit in between points or something, right? If I submit 2 vertices and say draw a triangle, it's going to tell me there's an error because it needs at least 3 vertices. It can't figure out, it doesn't see that there's supposed to be some kind of logic in the vertex shader that turns 2 vertices into a triangle. That's all a geometry shader. That's what the geometry shader is for. Is you would then say something like, I have submit to you this many vertices, and in the vertex shader you just manipulate the points, and in the geometry shader you emit the actual primitives from the input primitives. I don't get how that solves the problem using vertex ID, because you still can't tell it. If I say I have 2 triangles to my, like, what do I tell the elements, the draw elements call? Like, that's not how it works. Let me just pull up shader code. Do I have I don't have shader code on this code base. Draw GL draw arrays. When you call GL draw arrays, right? That's what triggers all the shader stuff to start happening. And what do you tell it? Because you have to tell it what mode you're in. So GL triangles, GL triangle strip. What do you tell it? If you tell it triangles and you tell it I have what, 1 triangle, 2 triangles. If you tell it 2 triangles, it's going to look for 6 vertices. You can't tell it, hey, I want you to just take these points and I'm going to tell you later what those points become in terms of geometry. That's a geometry shader. My point is you can't emit 2 vertices from 1 in a vertex shader. If I tell it to use 3 vertices to make a triangle, or if I tell it to use 4 vertices to make 2 triangles, it won't only index those 4 and then realize that it's emitting 2 vertices. I would just, there's no point in discussing this. That's just not how it works. Unless there might be something to it that I totally don't understand, but I would need to see sample code. Here's sample code. Alright. GL position equals projection times vec4 x and 2. Out texture coordinate. See, I still don't understand index coordinate x, index coordinate y. The number of output coordinates and the number of input coordinates is still the same though, right? It's the same number of input and output coordinates. I don't really understand. Vertex ID. You can use the vertex ID to what? I don't even know. One coordinate. Are you submitting the same coordinate multiple times? I don't understand. I do not understand, because there's no way in the vertex shader to have more output vertices than input vertices. So like this code I'm looking at here, I gotta get off this because it's not gonna make any 4coder progress. But I'm trying to understand, because there's, smart people telling me this is a thing, and I completely flies in the face of how I understand vertex shaders to work. So you take this is about instancing, isn't it? You only need 4 verts with an index referencing the overlapping. Yeah, you could use an index buffer. That solves the problem trivially, but it's a pain to build a vertex buffer and doesn't save you that much space. You end up saving, like, you have 2 less coordinates, but then you have 6 more coordinates, or 6 more. You have 2 less vertices, which saves you maybe 8 or 10 coordinates, but then you have to add in 6 more coordinates in the index buffer. It's not a huge win, honestly, for text rendering. Let me see, instance ID. If you're using instance ID, then it makes sense, because then you could be getting more than one vertex per vertex. But how are you doing that? I mean, you still have to tell it I've got this many triangles, right? Yeah, I really, really, really am struggling to see how this works. It doesn't matter how many data points are the input. If we need 6 output vertices no matter what for a quad. We're doing 2 triangles. We need 6 output points, even if we don't have 6 input points. Now, if we're calling vertex shader 6 times, how do we get it to call 6 times on the same vertex? I guess that's instancing. But my understanding of instancing was that you couldn't get it to build a triangle out of 3 different instances. It still has to be able to build a single triangle within one instance. I understand that. I'm not saying that that's the problem. What I'm saying is I don't get how that's possible. I get that we want to save the size of input to reduce the transfer. What Godling is saying is that you call the vertex shader 6 times on one vertex and you produce 6 vertices. And I don't know how that's possible, because as far as I understand, vertex shaders are one-to-one. Each vertex in becomes one vertex out, and there's no way to get multiple vertexes out of one, as far as I know. Except through instancing, but even if you do that, you can't get it to... even if you can get multiple using instancing, you can get more than one vertex out of a vertex, but you still can't get a primitive out of separate instances, as far as I know. Now, the code you sent me does use instancing, but in position 0, in position, that's your X and your Y. Out text chord. So you're setting GL position and out text chord. That's your texture coordinate. So what is your GL position? It's in position 0 plus the instance ID modulo the map width times the tile width. Instance ID over the map width. You're taking your instance IDs, and I can see that what you're doing is you're using the instance ID to pick which tile you're on. I still don't see how this is taking 4 input coordinates and making 6 output coordinates. I'm sorry. Yeah, I think I'm going to ignore the rest of this. I'm pretty sure I know what I'm talking about. If I don't, I'll need more clear examples than what I've got, because I'm pretty sure a vertex shader is 1-to-1. So why are these all messed up? Okay. Yeah, that'd be great. Move the rest of this conversation somewhere else. I want to wrap up my current to-do item. So, but it is interesting, and if any of these things are possible, I want to know. So that's why I'm having a hard time ignoring the chat. But moving on, we can run unit tests, and that shouldn't work because it can't find the path. Yeah. So what we need to do is go and ask, how do we run unit tests? Test units. Yeah. There. So the we'll call it data path is at pushd data test popd, and there we go. /build. I'm going to move out a couple other things too. Let's set you to that, and let's set build to that. So build path, we push that, and then here we grab that. Cannot find the path specified. So now I need to make sure I have the right name for the path. Non-source, right? 4coder non-source slash test data slash sample files. I'm actually going to rename this to samples. Alright, cool. And yes, that is breaking. Right here in the middle of this test. Okay. So we have that working now. And that's all that was working previously on this branch. So I think we can switch off of this. And I also want to merge master into this real quick. Alright, we got one problem. Captain Craft, you. By the way, I know I put an end to the conversation, but I just saw that you had something before I put an end to it. Um, so I am talking about position. So if your solution does not address taking 4 vertex coordinates to 6, then that's a problem because that's exactly what I was asking about. If I can see how you could apply that to getting the vertex, to getting the uh, texture coordinates, though. I can see how you would do that, but now you're submitting 4 texture coordinates for each position instead of 2. Like now you're submitting 4 texture coordinates and looking up the correct one. Unless you have a way to do the striding thing that I was asking about earlier, I still don't see how that's actually a win. But maybe it is. I don't fully understand these things. I just doesn't make a lot of sense to me right now. And we need to go and merge for a file view. Merge problems, where are they? Alright, so let's see. The code up here, what code are we in? This is in draw file, okay. So the code from master versus this code. The difference is that this code tokens use and token I is less than token array count. Index token index token I minus 1. Style get color token I minus 1 current token. I think I just want to use all of the stuff from here. Yeah, so that was the bug I fixed not too long ago actually, and that's why it's giving me a merge conflict, is that I changed the master version to have that bug be gone. So yeah, that's not a problem. Are there any other merge issues? Okay. Let me make sure we can build. Okay. And now I'm going to go like this. Did I not save the change? Oh well. Merged. Alright. So that concludes our visit to the 401x branch. I think I've migrated all of the things that I can remember. I actually don't think that. I feel like I'm missing one. But I'm blanking on where. That didn't help. I was hoping that would prevent it from going full screen immediately. That minus W. All right, let's just see if we can do everything normally. What am I looking for? Alright, what about run? Is run profile not a thing? It's not. Alright, you are retired. I'm keeping you at 7. And let's see, maybe it's build package that I'm concerned about. So let's try to package this version of 4coder up and see what happens. Did it reference data at all? I think at one point it used to reference data, and I've already moved all of the dependencies over to the non-source folder in the foreign thing, actually. I don't think it pulls from data anymore now that I think about it. So maybe... yeah, it looks to me like this is working just fine. Okay. Yeah, I think that we have achieved this to do. And it took much longer than it should have because of all the font talk, but that's fine. That's part of what streaming's about. So next I'm going to take a lunch break, and when I come back we will do this item, which is I want to... oh, you know what I should actually do? No, we'll do that later. No. I need to insert another one here. Set up a script for running input tests. Alright, we'll do that when I get back. Last question before I go, Croifa, what's for lunch? It's a good question. I actually haven't planned that out today. I have some options. But I am a little bit frustrated because I don't have a whisk, which is something I should go get. But I don't know if I'll go get it right now. I need a whisk because I've been meaning to make nacho cheese for a while, and I mean, I want a whisk for it. I don't really have a mixing spoon of any kind either, so I should get one of those too. But yeah, I've been wanting to make nacho cheese for a while, but I won't be able to do that today. Not sure what I'll do instead. I will be back though. I might bring cookies. That's one thing I'll probably have to... I haven't got any cookies, but Yeah, I could just use a fork. Problem is I don't even have very long forks. I would have to stick my hand pretty far into the pot, and I'm a bit of a chicken. I don't like the heat. But I could do that. Anyway, we will be back later. Oh, one more question. Alex Kelbo asks, is this really going to be a 6-hour stream? It's not going to be a 6-hour continuous stream. It's going to be me streaming on and off. I'm going to take a lunch break right now, and I'll come back. I'm going to keep on streaming till the time I scheduled, or later, though. I do intend to go for long periods of time. But this stream is too long. I'm cutting it off. See y'all later. Thanks for stopping by. I will be back soon.